Part 91. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 901. Chapter 901, How are you more advanced than me? Fan Kinjao naturally understood where Guanpanner was arrogant, so he smiled and said, I feel ashamed to say that I am not ungrateful, but I really don't know what concubine means, but Miss Guan he thought I was being aggressive and didn't appreciate it, but it made me a little curious, how did Miss Guan see it? What is the crown princess trying to do? Isn't it enough to embarrass my aunt? Now she wants to embarrass me as well. Guanpanner looked at Fan Kinjao coldly. Fan Kinjao still had a smile on his face. Concubine has a high position in the palace, so I don't dare to embarrass her, but Miss Guan has always been in trouble with her from the moment she opened her mouth to now. I don't remember that I have ever had such a problem. I have not offended the Miss Guan family, but in terms of status, it is indeed out of bounds for Miss Guan family to speak to me like this. Not to mention that I am Miss Guan family, even if I punish Miss Guan family, it is reasonable. Guanpanner didn't expect Fan Kinjao to be so arrogant, and she couldn't help but lose her temper. My ancestors were the Guan family who contributed to the founding of Ziliang. How can you, a man who relies on men to show off his power, be able to compare? Panda Fei frowned when she heard this. This is indeed the case, but it is still inappropriate to say it so openly. But it was too late for concubine Panda not to say she wanted to stop her, but even if she wanted to smooth things over, because just when she was about to speak, Fan Kinjao's voice had already come to her mind. Miss Guan's words are quite right. I have great ambitions, but my identity is appointed by the emperor. By saying this, is Miss Guan questioning the emperor's decision? Guanpanner's expression changed, and just as she was about to speak, concubine Panda interrupted, Panner must not be rude. Not to mention the princess, every prince and concubine here is appointed by the emperor to be married. When Han Jingchen and others heard this, their faces changed slightly. What did concubine Panda mean? She was clearly saying that they were all women who depended on men for their existence, but didn't concubine Panda also spend all day in the palace to please the emperor? Why didn't she see what kind of virtue you are? Guanpanner took in the expressions of Han Jingchen and others, then looked at Panda Fei and said with a smile, Auntie is right, Panner was reckless. Fan Kinjao listened to these words of holding a gun and a stick, looked at Guanpanner and said, if you put it like this, Miss Guan is not only reckless but also superficial. It is true that we are all the royal daughters-in-law. Marry husbands, follow their husbands is a rule that has not changed for centuries in Ziliang, but what if the Guan family is one of us, and we are not looking for support for ourselves, but the Guan family is relying on the Guan family? They are all speaking on the basis of their status, so who is superior to whom? You. Princess Pinglai is pregnant and should not stand for long periods of time. I will accompany her to the flower hall to sit for a while. I hope concubine Panda will forgive her. No matter how Guanpanner glared, Fan Kinjao saluted concubine Panda and then led Yan Hanbei towards the pavilion not far away. When Han Jingchen and the other princes and concubines saw this, they naturally followed him. Other people in the backyard could clearly tell that concubine Panda's niece had suppressed the situation, and they all slunk away with their feet wet, fearing that they would become a vent for others' anger. Concubine Panda knew that Guanpanner had always been domineering, so she chose her among all the little daughters in the family. But she didn't expect that she would be so uncontrollable. After leading people into the flower hall, she said with a stern face, you now that you have not stepped into the royal door, you need to think twice before doing anything. Guanpanner didn't dare to disobey her aunt, but she was holding her breath in her heart. In my opinion, it was my aunt's niece who was too weak, which made those people so rampant. They didn't even give her aunt's face. I wanted to help my aunt vent her anger, but I didn't expect that Fan Kinjao would be so difficult to deal with. Concubine Pan knew that Guanpanner's words were intended to please her, but her anger was reduced a lot. It's good if you want to earn face for me, but your current status is indeed no better than those who came here early, but you also there is no need to worry, since Imperial concubine Yu has allowed you to come with me today, she is determined to bring this matter together, and when you really become the mistress here, it will be too late to help me. Guanpanner had already met the third prince when she entered the door. Thinking of his elegant appearance, her heart beat a few times faster uncontrollably. I have remembered what my aunt said. Don't worry, aunt. I will definitely be filial to my aunt from now on. Concubine Panda nodded with satisfaction. Although she had always been worried about Pan Yulu's death, fortunately Concubine Yu did not give the vacant position to others, so even if she didn't want to let go of Pan Yulu's death, she still had to let go. People always have to look forward. Everyone at the pavilion looked very worried after they sat down. Although the third prince's concubine didn't get along with us, she always looked pretty good, but now this Guanpanner has a condescending attitude when we first met. It makes people uncomfortable just thinking about it. The second prince's concubine. Frowning. The eighth princess sighed, there is nothing we can do about it. The Guan family has been resting on their laurels, relying on their reputation as the founding heroes. Even though the Guan family has not produced anyone who has served the imperial court for 3 generations, their popularity has not diminished. Which is enough to show the royal family's attitude towards the Guan family. Yan Hanbei sighed, if such a person really becomes the successor of this house, our life will be colorful again in the future. The second prince's concubine. Where is the diversity? Eighth princess. It is clearly the light of the sword and the shadow of the sword. Han Jingchen looked at Fan Qinjiao and said, do you think Guanpanner can really marry in? Fan Qinjiao said, since concubine Panda can bring people here on this occasion, it fully illustrates concubine Yu's attitude. Han Jingchen nodded, in that case, the matter is settled. Fan Qinjiao looked at the seemingly calm lake in the distance and remained silent. For concubine Panda, concubine Yu's attitude naturally determines everything. But for Guanpanner, this is the residence of the third prince. Even if concubine Yu really wants to hand over the position of the third prince to Guanpanner, it would be beyond her reach. In order to be corrected, Fan Swinning worked Bailey wrongs. This can be seen from Bailey Wrong's protection just now. In this case, how could Fan Swinning watch helplessly as the position of the third prince and concubine was occupied by someone else? In the last life, Fan Swinning often opposed concubine Yu. In this life, Fan Swinning will never be outdone by concubine Yu. A maid hurriedly entered the courtyard, looked at Fan Qinjiao and said, to inform the crown princess, the sixth prince is here and would like to invite the sixth prince and princess to the front yard. Han Jingchen was stunned, the sixth prince is here? What is he here for? When a royal daughter-in-law goes to funeral, it is inevitable that the third prince, as the husband, comes to attend the funeral, but why would the other princes come to attend the funeral for a royal daughter-in-law? Han Jingchen got a headache when she thought about that stupid person at home. She picked up her skirt and went to the front yard to look for him. Fan Qinjiao took Han Jingchen's hand, looked at the maid and asked, who asked you to pass the message? The sixth prince is a little short-sighted, but he is not a fool. How can you not understand such a simple truth about when you should show up and when you should avoid it? End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 902. Chapter 902, The child in the belly is important. The maid was stunned, as if she didn't expect Fan Qinjiao to ask such a question. She thought for a moment and then said, when Aunt Fan was accompanying the third prince to socialize in front, she saw the sixth prince's carriage and thought that it might be the sixth prince. Yes, I sent a servant here to inform you. Hearing this, Han Jingchen felt anxious. Would Fan Swinning be so kind? Fan Qinjiao smiled coldly, of course Fan Swinning had no good intentions. But since Fan Swinning sent someone here to spread the word, it must not be groundless. If the sixth prince really showed up on such an occasion, the emperor would be furious if the news spread and the royal family would lose face. After thinking about it carefully, Fan Kinjao looked at the second and eighth princesses and said, "Can you please accompany the sixth princess to the front yard to have a look? Since this maid told me, let her lead you there." The second and eighth princesses understood. This was to make them keep an eye on the maid who was delivering the message. If there was really something fishy, they would have evidence to excuse her. Fan Kinjao looked at Han Jingchen and said, "Go. If the sixth prince is really here, he will be driven back no matter what the reason." Han Jingchen knew that Fan Kinjao was worried that she would not be able to handle it on her own, so she asked the second and eighth princesses to accompany her. She nodded and followed the maid out of the pavilion. At the end of the day, things get easier when there are more people. As soon as the others left, Yan Hanbei looked at Fan Kinjao and said, "What do you think Fan Swinning is planning?" Fan Kinjao thought about Guan Pan's existence and said, "No matter what we plan, we must be careful." The two were talking when they saw another palace maid enter the pavilion. Someone just came to report that the sixth prince seemed to be here. Concubine De went to the front yard, but she was worried that Miss Guan was in the flower hall, so I'm thinking of asking my slave to come over and tell Princess Pinglai that they should go over and be with Miss Guan. Let the current crown princess keep company with the princess. Concubine Panda's niece is really a big arrogant person. But regardless of whether Fan Kinjao or Yan Hanbei, no matter how much they slandered in their hearts, they did not really ignore Pan Dfi's instructions. Otherwise, when word got out, wouldn't they take the initiative to give out the clues to others? But just when Yan Hanbei wanted to get up, Fan Kinjao pulled her and sat back down. "Didn't you just say you were dizzy and nauseous? If so, you need to breathe more fresh air." Miss Guan sighed. "I'll just go and accompany you. The baby in Yan Hanbei's belly will be full term soon. How could he be so squeamish now? Even if he ran with the baby for dozens of meters, there would be no problem." Listening to Fan Kinjao's words, he knew that she was worried about her being in danger. "I feel much better now. Why don't I follow you to the flower hall first? If you feel unwell, I can come out later." Yan Hanbei looked at Fan Kinjao and said. Even Pan Dfi is not in the flower hall now, and Guan Pan'er is not a fuel-efficient lamp. If something really happened, she would be able to help Fan Kinjao get away with it. Being unwell means the child is making a fuss. Princess Pinglai is pregnant with twins and grandsons, but she cannot bear to be aggrieved. Concubine De has always understood justice, so she can understand. Fan Kinjao said, stood up and followed the palace maid walk towards the outside of the pavilion. Whether the sixth prince is really here or not, it is obvious that he is a bait used by Fan Swinning to scare away others. If this is the case, Fan Swinning will have to make other moves. Fan Kinjao is rough-skinned and fleshy, so he is not afraid of Fan Swinning's inner calculations, but Yan Hanbei is still pregnant with a child, and there is no way he can serve as a stepping stone for Fan Swinning to rise to the top. In the flower hall, Guan Pan'er was sitting bored by herself. She heard the footsteps and looked at the door with joy, thinking that her aunt was back. She never thought that Fan Kinjao would be the one who walked in. What is she here to do? Fan Kinjao could tell from Guan Pan'er's expression that Concubine Panda's instructions were probably not mentioned to her in advance, so Concubine Panda must have noticed something, so she sent a message to her and Yan Hanbei to come and accompany her. The maid led Fan Kinjao to the door, then bowed her knees and left. Under Guan Pan'er's gaze, Fan Kinjao walked through the door unhurriedly, then sat on the chair opposite Guan Pan'er, just looking at her. "Why does the crown princess have to squeeze in with me in such a big place outside?" Guan Pan'er frowned. Now that there are no outsiders here, she has no scruples when speaking. Fan Kinjao said calmly, "If it weren't for the summons of Empress Dowager De, I would of course hope to stay further away from things I don't like." Guan Pan'er didn't expect that Fan Kinjao's arrival was actually her aunt's intention, but when faced with Fan Kinjao's merciless words, even she was completely blackened. I don't know what I'm arrogant about, no one in the main city knows that you're just a without a father. If you weren't lucky enough to be chosen as the crown princess by the emperor, you wouldn't even be qualified to talk to me based on your status. Fan Kinjao sneered, that's really embarrassing. I'll be lucky if you let me. Guan Pan'er. Can this person be a little thicker skinned? Fan Kinjao, you don't have to be too arrogant. You and the prince haven't gotten married yet, and there is no one else around him. But once you get married to the prince, do you think you can occupy the prince by yourself? By that time, the warblers around the prince will be able to crush you to death. I won't bother Miss Guan about the future matters. Miss Guan should care more about herself, and don't be complacent about being a stepping stone for others. Fan Kinjao also became cruel when he said it. Now, besides apart from her, the only one left is Guan Pan'er herself. Guan Pan'er can have no scruples, so naturally she won't get used to anything. If you want to stab her with a knife, Guan Pan'er is not worthy. What do you mean by this? What do you mean? Miss Guan won't think about it if she has a head. You made it clear to me. Facing Guan Pan'er's questioning, Fan Kinjao kept his mouth shut. Guan Pan'er was anxious and angry, and her face changed color. She had never been treated like this before in her whole life. The most hateful thing was that Fan Kinjao not only dared to treat her like this, but also dared to do it blatantly. Ignore her. Fan Kinjao, you. Guan Pan'er was furious and stood up directly. However, before she could finish her words, she saw Fan Swinning entering the door carrying a tray. Seeing the angry look on Guan Pan'er's face, Fan Swinning hurriedly came over and said with a smile, "Why is Miss Guan so angry? Even if my sister said something inappropriate, it was not malicious." Miss Guan sat down and drank. Tea relieves qi. Guan Pan'er knew that Fan Swinning and Fan Kinjao were related by blood. Now after listening to these words, she thought that Fan Swinning was helping Fan Kinjao. Seeing Fan Swinning lifting the teacup, she brushed it over and said, "Stop pretending here, stay away from me." Guan Pan'er's strength was actually not very strong, she just wanted to keep Fan Swinning away from her, but she didn't expect that with just such a wave of her hand, Fan Swinning fell to the ground. There's a rush. The teacup and the tray were all smashed to the ground. Fan Swinning was lying on the mess on the ground, trembling in pain, and traces of blood dripped on the ground. Just looking at it was shocking. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 903. Chapter 903. It's best to just watch with cold eyes. Everything happened so suddenly that Guan Pan'er was stunned. When she came to her senses, she saw that one side of Fan Swinning's cheek was scratched by a fragment, and blood was flowing down. Why, how could this happen? Guan Pan'er was stunned, looking at Fan Swinning lying on the ground. Everyone was dumbfounded. Fan Kinjao looked at the wound on Fan Swinning's face with cold eyes. It looked quite deep, but it was not big. With the skills Fan Swinning learned at Yaeshi Pavilion, it would not be difficult to restore his face to its original state. So, is this Fan Swinning's plan? After all, Guan Pan'er is still an unmarried girl. If she really gets a bad reputation, it will definitely affect her life. Not only will she be unable to get through the royal gate, but also other prominent families in the main city will be afraid of it. I don't dare to have a daughter-in-law with a stigma. Sure enough, he is still the vicious and insidious Fan Swinning from the previous life. This move is simply to kill Guan Pan'er. The sound from the flower hall alerted other people in the yard. The servants of the third prince's residence saw it and hurriedly ran towards the front yard. Not long after, Bailey Rongs entered the flower hall, dusty and dusty. What happened? Facing the sudden arrival of Bailey Rongs, Guan Panner became even more confused. He opened his mouth but found that no sound came out at all. On the contrary, Fan Swinning, who was lying on the ground, looked at Bailey Rongs and said, "It's all my fault. It was my concubine who got in Miss Guan's eyes. Your Highness, please don't blame Miss Guan. Miss Guan is just frivolous. After a slight push, I realized that I couldn't stand firm myself." Hearing this, Fan Kinjao sneered in his heart. Fan Swinning's pitiful appearance can be said to be very familiar and proficient. It was thought that in the previous life, after Bailey Rongs climbed to the top, he imprisoned her in the harem for a long time in order to obtain the Tao family's medical code from her. Even though Bailey Rongs had no interest in her at that time, and he didn't even bother to deal with her, her presence still bothered Fan Swinning. During those days, Fan Swinning framed and slandered her in every possible way, allowing Bailey Rongs to torture her in every possible way, and even finally allowed Fan Swinning to use lynching. I still remember that Fan Swinning had the same expression at that time as she does now. Now that time has passed and the past collides with reality, it really makes people miss it. You're talking nonsense. I didn't mean it at all. On the contrary, you threw it to the ground on purpose. You are just a little concubine. How dare you slander me like this? How brave you are. Guan Pan came back to his senses. My son, his chest was rising and falling with anger, and he looked like he wanted to eat Fan Swinning. Fan Swinning lay weakly on the ground, tears mixed with the blood on her face, and flowed down in large quantities. Miss Guan is right, it's my fault, it's all my fault. I slandered Miss Guan, but I would never dare. My sister was also there at the time. How could I do such a stupid thing? As these words fell, everyone's eyes naturally fell on Fan Kinjao. Fan Kinjao. Well, she finally understood the reason why she was sitting here. Fan Swinning wants to slander Guan Panner, and it is difficult to convince the public on her own. But if she invites another person who is not willing to deal with Guan Panner as a witness, her words will naturally be more convincing. And Fan Kinjao was just chosen to be this so-called witness. After all, Guan Panner's temper is here. With Fan Swinning's IQ, even if she thinks about it with her eyes closed, she will definitely guess that Fan Kinjao and others are not dealing with Guan Panner. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Fan Swinning analyzed this sentence clearly. I wonder what the princess saw just now. Bailey Rongs walked up to Fan Kinjao. He didn't know why, but he just didn't like letting Fan Kinjao see his housework. And the more this happened, the gentler he became when facing Fan Kinjao. It was so gentle that even he was a little surprised. Fan Swinning took advantage of the situation and looked towards Fan Kinjao, thinking that she was lying if she said she wasn't anxious. She had inquired about Guan Panner's temperament early in the morning and knew that he was a difficult person to get along with. Moreover, the people in the backyard also told her that Guan Panner had been making rude remarks to the princess. In this case, Fan Kinjao was naturally helpful. The reason why she stepped on Guan Panner together. Don't Fan Kinjao not want to see Guan Panner's jokes? That's what I naturally want to do. Guan Panner also knew that her relationship with Fan Kinjao was tense. No matter how stupid she was at this time, she was afraid that Fan Kinjao would help Fan Swinning, so she said, as the daughter-in-law of the royal family, if she really opens her mouth and gives false testimony, she will be disgraced. It's a royal face. As expected, she is an arrogant young lady. She is almost dying and still keeps threatening her. Fan Swinning felt a little more at ease after listening to Guan Panner's words. Fan Kinjao knew that he had been dragged in by Fan Swinning, and it was impossible not to speak. He faced everyone's gaze and said to Bailey Rongs, I was actually sitting here just now, but when the incident happened, I was thinking other things, so I didn't see clearly what happened. Bailey Rongs was stunned, as if he didn't expect that Fan Kinjao didn't help anyone. Originally, he thought that Fan Kinjao's dislike for Fanswinning was to some extent partial to Guanpanur. Fanswinning was dumbfounded. She never expected that Fan Kinjao actually didn't help her. But the crown princess was sitting opposite Miss Guan, how could she not see? Fan Kinjao smiled half-heartedly, sitting close doesn't mean you have to stare at something all the time. And I don't know what will happen in advance. It would be more suspicious if I really looked carefully. If you haven't seen it, you haven't seen it? Can you bite me? Guanpanur also didn't expect Fan Kinjao to say this. For fear that Fan Kinjao would regret it, she looked at Fanswinning and said, since no one can testify for Aunt Fan, what else can Aunt Fan say? Fanswinning suppressed the urge to swallow Fan Kinjao's heart, and continued to say softly, Miss Guan also said that I am just a little concubine, so how can I dare to slander Miss Guan? I just regret that no one can testify for me now, but I believe that those who are innocent will themselves be purified. You stop pretending, I didn't push you at all. What do you know? I didn't expect Aunt Fan to be so secretive. I'm afraid the previous 3 princes and concubines also suffered a lot at the hands of Aunt Fan. I know that the Miss Guan family looks down on me, but the 3rd prince's concubine is no longer here. No matter what Miss the Guan family says to me, I'm fine, but please keep some moral integrity so that the 3rd prince's concubine can leave in peace. In the flower hall, Guanpanur and Fanswinning were fighting endlessly. The guests outside the door were stunned to see and even more stunned to hear. Fan Kinjao was sitting aside and drinking tea leisurely. He could be said to be the only comfortable person present. She really didn't like Guanpanur, and she also didn't like Fanswinning. If she had to choose between the two, she would rather sit aside and watch the fun. Looking at them chewing their hair into pieces is the scene she enjoys the most. How spectacular! End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 904. Chapter 904. The Crown Princess serves as a midwife. Bailey Rongs had a splitting headache when he heard this, but no matter how Guanpanur and Fanswinning quarreled, there would never be a result. Thinking that there were many guests waiting in the front yard, Bailey Rongs called in a few maids. I'll go down and have a rest with Aunt Fan first, and then I'll invite a doctor to the house. The maids came over quickly, carefully helped Fanswinning up and walked towards the door. With Fanswinning leaving, the guests gathered at the door naturally returned to the courtyard. Not long after, Fan Kinjao and Guanpanur were left in the flower hall again. Guanpanur looked at Fan Kinjao reluctantly and asked, did the crown princess enjoy the theater just now? Fan Kinjao nodded happily, not bad. Guanpanur. She has truly never seen a more hateful person than Fan Kinjao. Don't think that I will thank you. I didn't push Aunt Fan at all just now, or maybe you were smart and didn't help her deceive others. Otherwise, if anything happens to me, the Guan family will definitely beg the emperor to investigate strictly. You can't get away with it either. Guanpanur snorted. Of course she would not thank Fan Kinjao. Fan Kinjao put down the teacup in his hand and said calmly, I'm just telling the truth. It's Miss Guan who is very articulate and does her duty. With Miss Guan's attitude just now, not to mention Aunt Fan alone, even the entire 3rd prince, I'm afraid all the people in the mansion can't do anything to you. Guanpanur always felt that Fan Kinjao's words were more like calling her a shrew, but the sad thing was that she couldn't find any evidence. Fan Kinjao didn't care what Guanpanur thought. He got up and walked out the door. The distance from the pavilion to the flower hall was not too far. There was such a big noise in the flower hall just now. Yan Hanbei should be able to hear it. Yes, but among the people who had just gathered at the door, there was no figure of Yan Hanbei. Just as Fan Kinjao left the door, the 2nd princess ran over in a panic. Oh no, Princess Pinglay was hit by someone, and her lower body is already red. Fan Kinjao was stunned and quickly asked, where is he? They were just sent in. The 6th prince and concubine are accompanying them. The 8th prince and concubine have already gone to inform the 3rd prince. The 2nd prince and concubine quickly pointed to the yard not far away. She also did not expect that the 6th prince and concubine had just been sent away. The 6th prince encountered such a thing when he came back. But thinking about it, I should be lucky. Fortunately, I was caught by them, otherwise I don't know how much time it would have been delayed. Since life was at stake, Fan Kinjao naturally did not dare to delay. He hurriedly walked towards the yard not far away with the 2nd prince and concubine. However, no matter how he walked, he felt it was too slow, so he simply started running. As soon as you enter the door, a faint smell of blood comes from the shop. Fan Kinjao walked around the screen and entered the back room, where he saw Yan Hanbei lying on the bed. His face was as white as paper, and his skirt and quilt were soaked with blood. Yan Hanbei saw Fan Kinjao entering the door and opened his mouth to say something, but Fan Kinjao walked over and held Yan Hanbei's shoulders. "Don't say anything, save some energy and make sure the child is born safely." Yan Hanbei's eyes turned red after hearing this, and he nodded vigorously. Fan Kinjao looked at Yan Hanbei and the 2nd princess and said, "Hurry up and ask the people in the mansion to boil hot water. The more the better, and then ask someone to bring some charcoal and a pair of scissors. It's best to have them. It has just been sharpened and has not been used before." After hearing this, Han Jingchen and the 2nd prince's concubine hurriedly walked out, but now that most of the maids were busy in front, they could not really go to the front to call people. Neng found a few maids and gave them instructions, and then the two of them split up, one boiling hot water and the other looking for things. When Bailey Rongs heard the news and rushed over, he heard that the 6th prince and concubine were boiling hot water in the kitchen, while the 2nd prince and concubine took the servants of the house to the storehouse to get charcoal themselves. After hearing the news, the 8th princess quickly asked for the direction of the kitchen, and then ran over with her skirt in hand. She heard that giving birth to a baby requires a lot of hot water, and she was afraid that the 6th princess would be too busy alone. The servants of the 3rd prince's residence were dumbfounded by the personal efforts of several princes and concubines. These are all pampered masters. I am afraid that they have never had food in Dalian since they were young, but now they are boiling water and carrying charcoal. How can we not be surprised? Bailey Rongs knew that those who could do this must have been united, and the only one who could unite all the princes and concubines to work together like this was Fan Kinjao. In fact, he was also curious as to why Fan Kinjao always had the ability to impress others. Why, he was the one who discovered Fan Kinjao first, but in the end he had to watch her marry someone else. "Your Highness, the Imperial Doctor is here," the servant's report sounded from behind. Bailey Rongs turned around and quickly motioned to the Imperial physician to go and see the person first. If something really happened to Princess Pinglay, he would have to bear the responsibility. The Imperial Doctor hurriedly entered the door carrying the medicine box. He saw that the room had been tidied up, and even basins of hot water were ready. At this time, the princess was kneeling beside the bed, observing Ping Ping. The sound in Princess La's stomach. Sun Qiantang, the humble minister, would like to express his regards to the Crown Princess and Princess Pinglay. The Imperial Doctor hurriedly stepped forward and bowed his head to say hello. Fan Kinjao looked at the Imperial Doctor and said, "No need to be polite. I see that Princess Pinglay has already started to activate. After the Imperial Doctor Sun cleans her hands, she will prepare the silver needles and come over to help." Dr. Sun nodded quickly and went to prepare, but when everything was ready, he only belatedly said, Princess Chi, if you want to give birth, you always need a midwife. I don't know who Princess Pinglay's midwife is. Will the time come?" Fan Kinjao looked at Yan Hanbei's unbearable pain and said softly, "The midwife should have been raised in Prince Pinglay's mansion, but now I'm afraid it will be too late to send someone to pick her up. Dr. Sun can only help administer acupuncture to help Princess Pinglay prevent the disease. If there is heavy bleeding, I will cooperate with Imperial Physician Sun and ask Princess Pinglay to use her strength." When Dr. Sun heard this, he almost dropped the needle bag in his hand. Absolutely not, no way. History of childbirth has required the cooperation between the imperial physician and the midwife. The imperial doctor is the main one, and the midwife is the auxiliary. If you let him instigate orders to the midwife, that's it. If you let him order the princess to do things, I'm afraid he won't live enough. Life is at stake, there is no delay, just do as Dr. Sun does, Fan Kinjao said. Seeing another movement under Yan Hanbei, he quickly stretched out his hand under the quilt. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 905. Chapter 905, Fire Tempering Acupuncture. Yan Hanbei was sweating profusely from the pain. If Fan Kinjao hadn't been by her side, she would have cried on the spot. Fan Kinjao noticed Yan Hanbei's tension and knew that she must be in terrible pain. He raised his head and comforted her. If you really can't help it, just shout out. I have never seen you look like you. There is no need to tense up in front of me. Yan Hanbei was clearly in severe pain, but he felt inexplicably relieved after hearing these words. He endured the pain and said, I heard that you delivered the child of the 6th prince's concubine. In my opinion, you don't want to be a crown princess in the future. It's better to just forget about being a midwife. As long as we people look at your face, we will be at ease. Fan Kinjao was relieved to see that someone could still joke. In that case, you should give birth to this child properly, and then accompany your prince to make money. It is very expensive to ask me to deliver the baby. Yan Hanbei still had tears hanging from the corners of her eyes. Hearing these words, she couldn't help but want to laugh. She was so dumbfounded that she almost lost her breath. It was only after Fan Kinjao calmed her down for a long time that she finally recovered. The imperial doctors on the side were all shocked. Since ancient times, every woman who has given birth to a child has not been through the gate of hell. This is the first time she has seen such a harmonious one. Is this the intimidating power of the crown princess? Yan Hanbei started to feel pain again. This time he didn't even have the strength to speak. Big beads of sweat rolled down his cheeks. He could only relieve it by breathing heavily. Fan Kinjao knelt in front of Yan Hanbei, observing the child's movements while asking Yan Hanbei to follow her rhythm. When the imperial doctor saw that the princess was really not just talking, he hurriedly walked over and inserted needles into several of Princess Pinglei's acupuncture points, first to prevent heavy bleeding due to excessive exertion, and then asked Princess Pinglei to adjust her breathing. Follow the crown princess to cooperate. Yan Hanbei had no time to think about anything at this moment. Anyway, she knew that as long as Fan Kinjao was there, she would be safe. She simply closed her eyes and gritted her teeth and just tried hard, thinking that no matter what, she must make her the child came into this world safely. I don't know how long it took, but a loud cry came from the ground. Yan Hanbei felt light all over. When he opened his eyes, he saw Fan Kinjao asking the imperial doctor for a silver needle. He heated the silver needle with the flames in the charcoal basin, and then gently fell on the child's body. If other people behaved like this, Yan Hanbei would jump up, but the target was Fan Kinjao. She really didn't even want to ask, and felt that Fan Kinjao was more reassuring to her than her own prince. On the side, Imperial Physician Sun stared wide-eyed. When he saw Fan Kinjao, he asked, "Is this fire-tempered acupuncture?" Fan Kinjao nodded and said, "After all, the child is less than a month old. Although the internal organs are fully grown, the bones are still more fragile than those of a full-term child." Several of its acupuncture points were temporarily closed with silver needles in advance, so that the body still has the illusion that it is in the mother's womb, and the silver needles can be removed when the baby is full term. Physician Sun had only heard of this kind of acupuncture before, but he didn't expect to see it with his own eyes in his lifetime. He was so excited that he couldn't even care about his fatigue, so he quickly found a notebook and recorded it carefully. Fan Kinjao did not hesitate to tell more people about his medical skills. After carefully explaining how to use needles and the methods of using them, he walked to Yan Hanbei with his child in his arms. Physician Sun knew that he should avoid suspicion at this moment, so he quickly packed his things and went out to report the news. "She's a sister. She looks very similar to you in appearance." Fan Kinjao sent the child to Yan Hanbei and said with a soft smile. Yan Hanbei looked at the small ball next to his cheek with a smile. When the child was not born, he always looked forward to his whole son, but when he really saw her, he felt that boys and daughters actually didn't matter anymore, as long as she was healthy. "Well, Kinjao, you don't know, when I fell to the ground just now, I really just hoped that she would be safe." Fan Kinjao frowned. "Do you still remember what happened?" Yan Hanbei thought for a while and said, "When I was in the pavilion, I heard someone coming over to tell me that something happened to you in the flower hall. I saw that there were indeed many people gathered outside the flower hall, so I thought about going over to take a look. Unexpectedly, as soon as I left the pavilion, a nun bumped into me. Fortunately, the sixth prince and the others returned to the backyard at this time, otherwise I really wouldn't know what to do." Hearing these words, Fan Kinjao always felt that something was wrong. It was so obvious that Yan Hanbei was pregnant. Unless someone was impatient, they would deliberately bump into Yan Hanbei at this time. Moreover, something did happen in the flower hall at that time, but it was not her who was in trouble. How could anyone go out of her way to follow her? Yan Hanbei distorted the facts. Just seeing that Yan Hanbo looked tired after giving birth, Fan Kinjao couldn't ask any more questions, so he said to her, "I will find out the other things. You can have a good sleep with the child here first, Ju. I will send someone to send a message to Prince Pinglai and ask him to come and take you back." Yan Hanbei nodded. "Kinjao, I asked you to worry about it." Fan Kinjao smiled and shook his head, covered Yan Hanbei with the quilt again, then turned and walked out. Unexpectedly, as soon as he walked out the door, he saw a lot of people standing in the yard. Han Jingchen, the second prince's concubine, the eighth prince's concubine, Bailey Rongs. Looking carefully into the crowd, even Pan Difei and Guan Pan'er were there. Compared to the others at this moment, Pan Difei's face was particularly ugly. The sun was shining brightly in the sky at noon, and it seemed that it couldn't even illuminate her dark face. As soon as Han Jingchen saw Fan Kinjao coming out, he lowered his voice and asked, "The imperial doctor just said that mother and daughter are safe, but is it true?" Fan Kinjao nodded and then asked, "What's going on?" Han Jingchen whispered, "Of course we caught the murderer who hit Princess Pinglai. We all saw it with our own eyes. How could we let someone run away? I just didn't expect that person to be the nun next to Princess Panda." Fan Kinjao looked at the nanny kneeling on the ground. He finally figured out what he had not figured out just now. He looked at Han Jingchen and asked again, "Is the sixth prince really here?" Han Jingchen didn't know what Fan Kinjao was asking about this, but he still said, "I get angry when you talk about my family. I don't know who I heard it from, saying that I was talking to someone in the third prince's mansion when the fight started. He rushed over without any regard for etiquette and asked me to tell him that he was just looking for a way out for himself." Hearing this, Fan Kinjao's heart tightened. Someone spread the word again. "Fortunately, I blocked him outside the house in advance. You don't know that concubine Pan also heard the one from my house arriving and went out to block people. If concubine Pan saw that the one from my house was really coming, I don't know how she would make a fuss about it." Han Jingchen was thankful. Road. Fan Kinjao, however, grew colder the more he listened. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 906. Chapter 906 Fanswinning's Methods. The sixth prince has a low sense of presence, but the more he is like this, the more he knows how to avoid it. So Fan Kinjao believed that what the sixth prince said was very credible. When they were in the backyard just now, they had some verbal conflicts with Guan Pan'er, but today is the day of the funeral of the third prince and concubine. Not to mention they had a few quarrels with Guan Pan'er. Even if they really got into a fight, it is absolutely impossible for Bailey Rongs to take the initiative to publicize this matter. Once the commotion really becomes known throughout the city, Bailey Rongs will naturally not be able to afford to lose this person. And if it weren't for the people sent by Bailey Rongs, then only Fanswinning would be left. After all, only the sixth prince came forward to drive Han Jingchen and others away. Fanswinning also calculated. To be on the safe side, she asked the second and eighth princes to accompany Han Jingchen. When Han Jingchen was trying to get the sixth prince to leave, Fanswinning sent someone to send a message to Pan Dfi. Nowadays, everyone knows that the sixth prince is stationed in Bailey Fengming. Concubine Panda is dedicated to helping concubine Yu make suggestions, so naturally she will not miss the opportunity to take advantage of the sixth prince's braid. However, Concubine Panda never dreamed that all of this would happen. It's just the mantis stalking the cicada and the oriole behind. Just now in the flower hall, Fanswinning really wanted to frame Guan Pan'er, but in fact, Fanswinning had one more trick up her sleeve, and that was Yan Hanbei. If Fanswinning can really frame Guan Pan'er for pushing her, then it will only be more beneficial to Fanswinning when the nun next to Panda Fei bumps into Yan Hanbei again. However, it doesn't matter even if Guan Pan'er is not successfully framed in the flower hall, as long as she can let the nanny next to Pan Dfi bump into Yan Hanbei smoothly, and Pan Dfi will naturally be doomed. The person who brought Guan Pan'er over today is Concubine Pan. Once Concubine Pan does something out of the ordinary, it will definitely affect Guan Pan'er. As a result, both Bailey Rongs and the people in the main city will naturally reject Guan Pan'er. What's more, maybe the emperor will be angry with Guan Pan'er because of Yan Hanbei's matter. King Pinglai will not take it seriously, but Yan Hanbei's belly is still the emperor's grandson. Just as Fan Kinjao was thinking about it, he saw Fanswinning walking tremblingly from a distance. As soon as he entered the yard, he knelt down in front of Bailey Rongs with a pop sound. Bailey Rongs frowned. "What are you doing?" Fanswinning raised her face with tears in her eyes. "I heard that something happened to Princess Pinglai, so I rushed over immediately. It's all my fault. The Third Highness believed in me so much that he handed over the backyard to me. I helped take care of it, but I didn't expect that something like this would happen. It's because I didn't take good care of myself, and no matter how your highness punishes me, I will definitely have no complaints." Hearing these words, Bailey Rongs looked at Concubine Panda. Concubine Panda's face became even more ugly when she was looked at like this. "The matter has been investigated clearly and has nothing to do with you. The imperial doctor also said just now that Princess Pinglai and her son are safe. I have also sent people to Prince Pinglai's mansion to deliver the news," Bailey Rongs said, signaling Fanswinning stood up and spoke. Fanswinning was obviously relieved when she heard that Princess Pinglai and her daughter were safe, but she still knelt on the ground and did not get up. Princess Pinglai is blessed with great fortune. Only God's care can save her from danger. But even so, I also have a lot of luck. I can't escape the relationship, so I just kneel here. When King Pinglai arrives, I will personally kowtow to King Pinglai and admit my mistake." Fanswinning's cheek that had just been scratched was wrapped in white cloth. Now as tears kept flowing across her face, the white cloth had already been soaked, and the blood inside leaked out. Just looking at it made people unable to help but feeling distressed. Even so, Fanswinning still ignored her injuries and just knelt on the ground and looked at Bailey Rongs longingly. I really felt pity for him with that pitiful and sensible look. Bailey Rongs looked at Fanswinning like this and said in his heart that the emotion was fake. No matter who bumped into Princess Pinglay, as long as something happened in the third prince's house, Bailey Rongs was inseparable from it. Now Fan Swinning would rather ignore the injuries on her face and kneel here waiting for King Pinglay's forgiveness. After all, is it not for him and the sake of the entire mansion? Fan Kinjao looked at everything in front of him quietly, but his dark eyes were cold. Ever since she guessed Fan Swinning's plan, she has been excluding Yan Hanbei. Her purpose was to keep Yan Hanbei and the child who was not in trouble, but she did not expect that Yan Hanbei had been included in Fan Swinning's plan early on. If the grandma hadn't hit her hard, if Yan Hanbei hadn't protected the child with her hands immediately, and if she hadn't rushed over immediately, the consequences would have been unimaginable. He is obviously the initiator of everything, but he is kneeling on the ground and pretending. How can he not make people feel sick? Isn't it said that Princess Pinglay and her daughter are safe? If that's the case, how could King Pinglay really care about the third prince? I really don't know why he has to pretend to be so hypocritical. Guan Pan'er frowning, he looked at Fan Swinning with eyes full of contempt and disgust. Fan Swinning was not angry at all after hearing these words. Instead, she kowtowed heavily to Guan Pan'er. I feel that Miss Guan's family doesn't like me. I also know that I have a low status and cannot follow Guan Pan'er. Miss Guan is the same as me, but I really just want to do something for His Highness, and I hope Miss Guan will allow me this opportunity. Guan Pan'er was startled by Fan Swinning's actions. What you want to do is because you are shameless. What does it have to do with me? Fan Swinning slowly raised her head, with a little dust still stuck to her forehead. Facing Guan Pan'er's disdain, she just pleaded miserably and said, what Miss Guan said is that everything is my fault, so I am willing to take all responsibility, even if you die to apologize, as long as it can calm King Pinglay. What are you talking nonsense about? I simply don't. Enough. Before Guan Pan'er could finish speaking, Bailey Rongs suddenly interrupted sharply. Guan Pan'er looked at Bailey Rongs blankly, her eyes widening in disbelief, as if she didn't believe that Bailey Rongs would yell at her for a concubine. Xuening is indeed just a concubine in my house, but since she is married, she is mine. I also hope that the Miss Guan family will know how to use discretion. If the Miss Guan family continues to be aggressive, I will have no choice but to see the guests off. Bailey Rongs looked at Guan Pan'er coldly and said, why did Guan Pan'er and Pan Di Phi appear here today? Does Bailey Rongs really don't know the reason? To put it bluntly, he just didn't want to pierce the paper. Bailey Rongs knew that everything was arranged by his mother and concubine, and he also knew what the Guan family meant, so he acquiesced to Guan Pan'er's existence, but this did not mean that Guan Pan'er could really do whatever he wanted in his mansion. Act recklessly. His Royal Highness is really a very affectionate person. I think if Concubine Yu saw this appearance, Concubine Yu would be doubly pleased. Concubine Panda said with a half smile. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 907. Chapter 907. There are more exciting things. Concubine Pan Di Phi has been in the palace for decades. What kind of methods have she not seen? She was indeed a little confused because of the suddenness of what happened just now, but seeing Fan Swinning kneeling here crying in the rain, if she couldn't taste it, then her previous decades would have been in vain. Concubine Panda's eyebrows were slightly lowered, and she looked at Fan Swinning again and said, since His Highness has entrusted you with the affairs of the backyard, no matter what happens, you are certainly to blame. Now that something has happened, you don't want to think about it. How can you calm down the anger of the Third Highness, but you are still here crying and crying? If you have this ability, Aunt Fan, you deserve to be a concubine for the rest of your life. Fan Swinning's expression changed when Concubine Panda said that. She lowered her head and said, what Concubine Da taught me is that I know I was wrong. Since you know you are wrong, get up quickly. My time is limited and I don't have time to watch you cry and scream here. If the auspicious time for the burial of the third prince's concubine is delayed, it will be useless for Aunt Fan to cry by then. Used it Pan Di Fi said coldly. If the burial time is delayed, the reputation of the royal family will be affected. When the emperor blames him, Fan Swinning will naturally not be able to bear it, so even if Fan Swinning does not want to get up, he will have to support himself and stand up. But just as Fan Swinning stood up, her body tilted and she fell to the ground. Bailey Rongs quickly stretched out his hand to help the person, and noticed that the person in his arms was cold and trembling. Then he looked at the boy behind him angrily and said, "What are you still doing? I didn't see the collision. Where is Princess Lass evil slave still kneeling? Send me an order to drag him out and kill him with a cane." Grandma, who originally thought she had escaped, was almost frightened to death when she heard these words. She knelt on the ground and kowtowed, "Old slave, I really didn't mean to do it. I didn't know what happened, but I bumped into Ping Lai. Princess, your highness, please have mercy, have mercy. Princess Pinglai and her daughter are safe." Even King Pinglai's attitude on this matter is unclear. At this time, he ordered to be killed with a stick. Why should the Third Highness be so anxious to help King Pinglai make the decision? Concubine Panda's face also darkened. The person who killed her with a rolling pin in front of her didn't hit her in the face. Bailey Rongs hugged Fan Swinning and said with a cold face, "It is an indisputable fact that someone close to Concubine has bumped into Princess Pinglai. Now I am just doing business, so why should Concubine be so partial?" The atmosphere in the courtyard suddenly became cold. Concubine Panda's face was as ugly as she could be. She didn't look like she was joking when she looked at the third prince, but the third prince really didn't know that it was Concubine Yu who brought her with her today. If the third prince really gave in public if she can't get off the stage, is she obviously going against Concubine Yu? Thinking of this, Concubine Panda's heart tightened. I'm afraid that the third prince not only knows it, but also does it on purpose. In this way, the third prince is planning to violate Concubine Yu's arrangement. If this is the case, Guan Pan'er will naturally not be able to marry into the third prince's mansion. Concubine Panda looked at Fan Swinning, who was nestling in Bailey Rong's arms. She was so angry that she wished she could have this little dragged out and cut into pieces to relieve her hatred. Han Jingchen looked at the scene and lowered his voice and said, "It's really wonderful." Fan Qinjiao sneered, "There's something even more exciting. Do you want to see it?" Han Jingchen was stunned for a moment and saw Fan Qinjiao suddenly walking towards Concubine Panda. Pan Di Fi. What to do? It was Concubine Panda who was in a stalemate with Bailey Rongs when she saw Fan Qinjiao suddenly walking in her direction. She said she wasn't nervous to say it was false, because she was afraid that Fan Qinjiao would cause trouble again at this time. One Fan Swinning is enough, but if we add Fan Qinjiao, Pan Di Fi gets a headache just thinking about it. Fan Qinjiao stood in front of Concubine Panda, bent his knees and said, "Since the Third Highness wants to find out everything clearly, this matter must not be ambiguous. I wonder if Concubine will allow me to check my mother's injury first." Concubine Pan Di Fi. When has it been and you still have your injuries examined? I have already said that Grandma's son did not bump into Princess Pinglai on purpose. Concubine Panda looked at Fan Qinjiao with guarded eyes, not believing that Fan Qinjiao would really be so kind to help her. Fan Qinjiao said unhurriedly, "Everything must be based on evidence. Since Empress Dowager Da is convinced that Grandma's son is innocent, why should she be afraid of having her injuries examined?" Concubine Panda was going to be furious, but Fan Qinjiao said it like this. If she continued to stop her in every possible way, wouldn't it be clear that she was a thief with a guilty conscience? Seeing that Concubine Panda acquiesced, Fan Qinjiao turned around and walked in the direction of Grandma's son. When Fan Swinning, who was nestled in Bailey Rong's arms, saw this, she gently tugged on Bailey Rong's sleeve and said in a voice like a mosquito, "Your Highness, I am afraid." Concubine Panda saw the scene in her eyes, and her chest hurt even more with anger. She was a shameless little bitch, She was still thinking about hooking up with a man at this time. Bailey Rongs looked down at Fan Swinning in his arms. Although Fan Swinning didn't say what he was afraid of, Bailey Rongs didn't know about the feud between Fan Swinning and Fan Kinjao. He was afraid that Fan Kinjao would take revenge. With these thoughts in mind, Bailey Rongs looked at Fan Kinjao and said, "This matter has been decided, so I won't bother the Crown Princess to intervene." Fan Kinjao stopped following the sound, turned to Bailey Rongs' direction and said, "After all, this matter involves Princess Pinglay. When we were in the room just now, Princess Pinglay also gave me full authority to investigate and handle the matter. I know that His Highness is well intentioned and hopes to give Princess Pinglay a satisfactory answer as soon as possible, but I think that since the answer should be a fair and just truth, what does your Highness think?" The words fell and he smiled faintly. Bailey Rongs was stunned for a moment, looking at the smile on Fan Kinjao's face. Fan Swinning seemed to have noticed something, and quietly leaned into Bailey Rongs' arms. When Bailey Rongs came to his senses, he could only nod helplessly and said, "In that case, I have nothing to say." According to the relationship between Fan Kinjao and Princess Pinglay, it is reasonable for Princess Pinglay to leave the matter to Fan Kinjao. Concubine Panda did not dare to stop it, and Bailey Rongs also had the same scruples. The word guilty as a thief is something that not everyone likes to bear. Fan Swinning didn't expect that Bailey Rongs really agreed, and a trace of anxiety flashed in her eyes, but thinking that she had done it perfectly, Fan Kinjao was afraid that nothing would be found out, and Fan Kinjao shouldn't be able to find out anything. Deliberately giving false evidence to frame her. After all, there are so many people watching. Fan Kinjao definitely wouldn't dare. Thinking of this, Fan Swinning quietly felt relieved, and waited for a while to see Fan Kinjao's helpless look. In other words, now everyone's eyes are on Fan Kinjao. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 908. Chapter 908. She really guessed it right. Fan Kinjao walked to Nani-san, knelt down and said, "I wonder where Nani-san was injured." Mother-son is the person close to Concubine Panda, so she naturally knows that Concubine Panda and the Crown Princess have never dealt with each other. Now after hearing these words, she subconsciously looked at Concubine Panda. "Pandi Fi. Is it useful to see her at this time?" Concubine Panda was helpless and could only say to Grandma Sun, "Just answer truthfully." Grandma Sun slowly rolled up her trouser legs. When Concubine was in the front yard, she heard the news that Miss Guan had an accident in the flower hall in the backyard, so she asked the old slave to come over first and take a look. Although the old slave was worried about it, he was looking at the Miss Guan family, but he didn't dare to lose control. Unexpectedly, just when he was about to reach the pavilion, he suddenly saw Princess Pinglay, who was also in a hurry. The old slave wanted to salute and say hello, but he didn't expect that at the foot of the one slip. If others heard this, it would be simply unreasonable sophistry by Grandma Sunday. However, Fan Kinjao was silent for a moment and then suddenly helped Grandma Sun up. Pandi Fi was stunned. "What are you going to do?" Fan Kinjao had no time to explain to Concubine Panda now. He just looked at Grandma Sun and said, "I wonder if Grandma Sun can lead me to the place where you fell." After hearing this, Grandma Sun looked at Concubine Panda again. Concubine Panda was obviously ignored by Fan Kinjao just now. She was obviously very unwilling to cooperate, but she still nodded helplessly. Otherwise, what else could she do? Aunt Sun quickly led Fan Kinjao out of the yard with a limp. Seeing this, the others quickly followed her. Everyone followed Aunt Sun to a corner not far from the pavilion. Grandma Sun stopped. Han Jingchen looked at this place and said, "This is indeed it?" The second and eighth princesses also nodded. The situation was urgent at that time, so they didn't pay attention to where it was, but now that they looked at this place, they remembered it. Grandma Sun pointed to the area where she fell, then looked at Fan Kinjao and said, I only remember that it was near here, but I can't remember where exactly I knocked down Princess Pinglay. Fan Kinjao glanced around the area briefly, then looked at Bailey Rongs and said, please send someone to dig, please, Third Highness. Bailey Rongs. Dig. What to dig? I wonder what the princess is looking for, Bailey Rongs asked. Fan Kinjao looked at Bailey Rongs and said, you will only know if you dig it up. Hearing this, Fan Swinning obviously became nervous. She couldn't believe that Fan Kinjao really guessed everything based on his wounds, but now that so many people were standing here, she couldn't find any reason to stop him even if she didn't want to. Bailey Rongs frowned, obviously showing impatience. But Fan Kinjao had already spoken. If he didn't comply, it seemed that there was some shady secret hidden in the third prince's mansion. He could only call a few servants in the mansion and dig around the place where Fan Kinjao's finger was. For the sake of beauty, when the pavilion was first built, the short stretch of road around it was all made of sand. Now it is not difficult to dig it out. Several servants have rounded their arms, and it didn't take much time to dig it out on the ground. Many holes were dug. Everyone stared with wide eyes, all curious about what kind of medicine the princess was selling in her gourd. Fan Kinjao didn't say anything. From time to time, he looked at Fan Swinning, who was hiding in Bailey Rongs' arms, taking in her extremely nervous look but trying her best to stay calm. Did she guess correctly? Your Highness, there is something. The slave also dug something up here. There is also here. As the voices of the servants rang out one after another, dozens of pebbles were dug out from the originally seemingly flat sandy road. Everyone was stunned when they saw this. How could there be such a thing here? The abrasions on Grandma Sun's legs are very obvious, but they are different from ordinary abrasions. The wounds vary in depth, and the heaviest part is accompanied by purple round bruises. Normally, she would fall down. It was absolutely impossible for such an injury to occur. I saw that there was no crossroads near the pavilion, so I thought that someone should have scattered cobblestones here in advance. As Fan Kinjao spoke, he randomly picked up a pebble on the ground and compared it with the wound on Grandma Sun's leg. Although it couldn't be said to be exactly the same, the shape of the wound was almost the same as the pebble. When everyone heard this, their hearts were beating fast. Dozens of cobblestones that were not supposed to appear here were dug out. If they were really used for decoration, why did Grandma Sun hide all these stones after bumping into Princess Pinglay? Unless someone deliberately hid the stone here so that Grandma Sun could bump into Princess Pinglay. Pan Dfi looked at everything in front of her in shock, and it took a long time before she looked at Fan Kinjao not far away. She couldn't believe that someone would plot against her right under her nose. But what she couldn't believe even more was that Fan Kinjao would actually help her. But Fan Kinjao just helped. And it's the kind that's well-founded. Fan Kinjao also looked at concubine Pan Dfi. When their eyes met, she nodded slightly. There was no need to say thank you. She had already paved the road ahead. As for what to do with the rest, she didn't need to say more. Concubine Panda knew that Fan Kinjao had always been at odds with the third prince. Normally, she should help the third prince, but now that her interests were involved, she could only put other things aside for the time being. No wonder I feel something is wrong. Grandma Sun is the old man who is following me. How could she make such a low-level mistake? It turns out that she has been tricked by some evil-minded people. If the matter had not been found out today, Grandma Sun, the people from your third prince's residence have taken my life. If concubine Panda dares to say she is number one in the entire palace when it comes to speaking harshly and loudly, no one dares to say she is number one. Her words like knives resounded through the entire third prince's mansion, and Bailey Rongs' face turned ugly. There are no words to describe it. Grandma Sun took the opportunity to kneel on the ground and burst into tears, old slave thinks that he has never done anything to disgrace the third prince. How come the people in the third prince's house hate old slave so much? This is not what he wanted. Put the old slave to death. Bailey Wrongs didn't expect that things would turn out like this, but before he could speak, he felt his arms sink. When he looked down, he saw that Fanswinning had passed out. Come here. Call the doctor quickly. Bailey Wrongs didn't know how to explain, so he simply took the opportunity to hug Fanswinning and hurriedly left, leaving all the remaining people where they were. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 909. Chapter 909 is a beautiful thought. As soon as Bailey Wrongs left, the servants from the third prince's residence also slipped away with greased soles of their feet. Concubine Panda did not expect that the third prince would leave immediately. She clearly did not want to give her an explanation. However, Concubine Panda was not in a hurry and directly asked someone to drive him back to the palace. Since she can't talk to the third prince, she will go to Concubine Yu and complain in person. Concubine Panda and her entourage left immediately, leaving all the remaining princes and concubines looking at each other with big eyes. Things have developed really dramatically. So that they didn't even realize what was going on, and everyone dispersed. Han Jingchen walked to Fan Qinjiao and said, "Have you known that Aunt Fan has evil intentions? Now that the matter is here, who else can it be except Fanswinning?" Fan Qinjiao nodded. Aunt Fan has stayed in the third prince's mansion for so long just to be corrected. Now that she has finally caught the opportunity, how could she let it go so easily? But Concubine Yu's intention, let alone she, not even the third prince, can refuse. That's why Fanswinning is working hard every step of the way today, because he wants to block Guan Panur's way into the house. I really didn't expect that such a little ant would have such calculations and ambitions. Fortunately, the princess found out today. Otherwise, if we really wait for Aunt Fan to be corrected, we may not be able to rest for a long time, the second prince's concubine Po said. To feel the most authentic. The eighth prince's concubine said, "It's true that this incident happened in the third prince's mansion, but looking at the number of people in this mansion, even if it can be said that it has nothing to do with Concubine Panda, we can't really say that it was Aunt Fan who did it. Hands and feet. To put it bluntly, if you just find someone to take the blame, who knows what's going on? Besides, in high-level mansions, it has long been common for slaves to take the blame for their masters." Of course Fan Qinjiao knew that Fanswinning was planning a way out for herself when she fainted at this moment, and the simplest and most effective way was to find someone to take the blame, as the eighth princess said. However, Fan Qinjiao is not in a hurry. Even if Fanswinning can escape the blame, there is still a big event waiting for her later. After all, Concubine Yu in the palace has never been a vegetarian. If Concubine Yu knew that Fanswinning was plotting against her like this, she would be very angry. There is just one thing that Fan Qinjiao can't figure out. The current Fanswinning is different from the previous life. In the last life, she helped Bailey Wrongs cheat the Hua family and accompanied Bailey Wrongs to the summit. She has such confidence. She naturally dared to compete with Concubine Yu. But what now? To put it mildly, she was just a discarded chess piece of Concubine Yu. If she hadn't caught Bailey Wrongs with some scheming, she might have lost her life. Fanswinning is so smart, how come she doesn't understand her humble status? But today Fanswinning dares to blatantly plot against Guan Panur, and even frame Concubine Panda. Isn't she afraid that Concubine Yu will really get rid of her in a fit of anger? Half an hour later, the sound of mourning sounded in the front yard of the third prince's mansion. Under everyone's silent gaze, the coffin containing Panula was steadily lifted by the people who supported the body, and slowly carried out of the third prince's residence. However, this group of people were not going to the royal mausoleum, but the Pan family's family tomb. It is true that Panyulu is the royal daughter-in-law engraved on the jade butterfly, but there are rules in Ziliang. Any daughter-in-law who has not taken care of the royal family is not allowed to be buried in the royal mausoleum after death. In other words, if there are no heirs by his side, it is impossible to be buried with his husband even when he dies. As the funeral procession gradually moved away, Panyulu's coffin also completely disappeared from everyone's sight. Bailey Rongs also waited until this time before returning to the front yard. The guests all heard that something happened in the backyard. Now that the third prince was back, naturally no one said anything, and they all kept saying their condolences to the third prince. Fan Kinjao looked at Bailey Rongs, who was socializing with the guests, with cold eyes and a cold heart. Regardless of whether he and Panyulu had feelings for each other, they were a couple for life. He thought that Panyulu was also pregnant with his child, but now they even disdain to see each other for the last time. Sure enough, the scumbag's heart will never be warmed up. But speaking of it, Panyulu was much luckier than her previous life. At least when Panyulu died, she did not see through the true face of this scumbag, otherwise she would have died in peace. As the guests left one after another, King Pinglai finally arrived belatedly. Knowing that his daughter-in-law almost gave birth and died, King Pinglai naturally looked unhappy. In addition, there had been a lot of discord with the third prince. After King Pinglai entered the house, he only asked Fan Kinjao for a few words and then ordered people from the palace to pick up Yan Hanbei and his daughter. From beginning to end, he didn't even say a word to the third prince. Bailey Rongs looked at King Pinglai's look of not letting strangers in, and his expression didn't look much better, but today something happened to Princess Pinglai in his house, and he was in the wrong, so he couldn't say much. I can only order someone to accompany King Pinglai carefully in case of emergency. Unfortunately, King Pinglai didn't appreciate it at all and kicked out all the people in the third prince's residence. That's an embarrassment. After watching King Pinglai take Yan Hanbei away, Fan Kinjao and others naturally stopped staying here and got on their own carriages to go home. Princess, please stay. Bailey Rongs' voice suddenly sounded outside the carriage. Fan Kinjao suppressed the extreme discomfort in his heart, sat in the carriage and said calmly, I wonder if the Third Highness has anything else to do. Bailey Rongs didn't expect that Fan Kinjao not only didn't step out of the carriage, but didn't even intend to lift the curtains. He felt very uncomfortable, but he still said, there are still many details about today's matter that have not been clarified. I hope the princess can keep silent for the time being and give me some time to verify. These words were just said in a nice way, but in reality they were just to tell Fan Kinjao to stop talking nonsense. Fan Kinjao snorted coldly, no matter what happened today, it all happened in the third prince's mansion. Instead of giving me instructions here when you have time, the third prince should find out the truth quickly. Bailey Rongs hesitated for a moment and tried his best to maintain the grace on his face. I'm glad that the crown princess is here today. Princess Pinglai was able to save the mother and daughter so quickly. I owe the crown princess a favor for this matter. I will definitely come to visit in person one day. Thank. Fan Kinjao didn't want to be confused with such a scumbag, so he refused straightforwardly. Even if we are not at the third prince's residence today, as long as it is a matter concerning Princess Pinglai, I will not refuse. It is getting late and I cannot disturb you. The third prince will stay here. Humbling, Bailey Rongs didn't give Bailey Rongs a chance to speak again, so he asked the coachman to drive off. Fan Kinjao, no matter what Bailey Rongs is planning, she will never give him this chance. As for what happened today, even if she didn't tell him, does Bailey Rongs really think that he can stop it? Stop dreaming. Fan Kinjao was right. After concubine Panda returned to the palace, she found concubine Yu with a look of grievance. Today, she took her nephew and daughter there at concubine Yu's request. How could she have imagined that the third prince would be so disrespectful? Not to mention, she almost lost her wife and soldiers. Concubine Yu's face naturally turned ugly after hearing this, but in front of Concubine Panda, she couldn't pay attention to her son's discomfort, so she could only suppress her anger and let Concubine Pan go back and wait for the news. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 910. Chapter 910, Helping the Wife to Vent Her Anger. As soon as Concubine Panda left, Concubine Yu couldn't hold back her anger anymore and kicked the footrest in front of her to the ground in anger. Bang! A sound frightened everyone inside and outside Yuyu Palace to the point where they all knelt on the ground. Yunyu heard the sound and rushed over. After sending the palace attendants out of the palace, she looked at her mother and concubine and said, "The third prince has passed away." Concubine Panda naturally has complaints against wrongs. Mother and concubine must not be instigated, that's it. Concubine Yu had a dark face. Of course I know Concubine Panda's little thoughts. It is just to reassure her that I will continue to use people who are related to her. Concubine Panda is also a smart person. This time I am looking for the daughter of the Guan family, but she is much more grateful than some white-eyed wolves. Yunyu heard that these words did not seem to be directed only at Bailey wrongs, so she asked, "What happened? What else could it be? Why am I so anxious to renew your brother's marriage? Isn't it because once we get involved with the Guan family, it will only benefit us and not bring any harm? But look at what he has done." She was openly helping Fan Swinning and Panda Fei to shout. Concubine Yu became angrier as she spoke. Had she known this was the case, she should not have let Fan Swinning get involved with her son in the first place. There is not much ability, and there are so many hearts. Now she is framed with Panda Fei, but she didn't even look at it. Yunyu was secretly frightened when she heard her mother and concubine talking about what happened in the third prince's mansion today. She didn't expect that Fan Swinning would not even care about her mother and concubine in order to prevent Guan Pana from entering. This matter is just Fan Swinning's temporary confusion. As long as the mother-in-law wants to let Guan Pana in, her little concubine can't stop her. Why should the mother-in-law be angry with her? Yunyu comforted softly. Concubine Yu frowned and looked at Yunyu. "You also speak for that bitch." Yunyu looked at her mother's expression and whispered softly, "I'm afraid my mother has forgotten that Fan Swinning was indispensable for the third prince's concubine to be able to shut her mouth so quickly. Now that Fan Swinning dares to openly frame Pan Di Fi, I'm afraid it's the same because it depends on a little bit." Concubine Yu's face was gloomy and cruel. "That bitch, she just helped me a little and wants to ask for interest from me. She is thinking well." Yunyu analyzed it carefully. Fan Swinning is quite clever, and his methods are sharp enough. If such a person can be used well, it will be of great benefit to us. Besides, Fan Swinning knows too much about us now. If it is true, it may not be that easy to get rid of. How could Concubine Yu not think of this? But as soon as she thought that Fan Swinning, that little bitch, knew that she didn't dare to get rid of her, Concubine Yu's heart became filled with panic. Concubine Yu felt uncomfortable, so naturally she couldn't make Fan Swinning feel comfortable. Even if she couldn't get rid of Fan Swinning for the time being, Concubine Yu would never make Fan Swinning feel better. That night, news came out in the palace that the third prince was heartbroken because the third prince's concubine died of illness. Concubine Yu was worried that the third prince would be depressed, so she knelt down in front of the emperor in person and begged the emperor to renew the third prince's string. Emperor Yongchang always loved the third prince, and when he saw Concubine Yu crying in front of his palace, he immediately called Bai Tu to his side. "Go and ask around to see if there is any hotel suitable for the third prince women. Their conduct should be dignified, and their families should be clean." Bai Tu hurriedly went out to inquire about it, and found out about Guan Panur. Guan family. After hearing Bai Tu's report, Emperor Yongchang thought of the relationship between the Guan family and concubine Panda. It is not that Emperor Yongchang is forgetful, but that the Guan family really has nothing to offer, so that after all these years, even he himself has forgotten why he let concubine Panda into the palace in the first place. I heard that the Miss Guan family accompanied concubine Panda to the funeral today. Unexpectedly, she had a very happy conversation with the third prince in the third prince's residence. I heard that even the people in the third prince's residence were curious, because since the death of the third prince's concubine, afterwards, the third prince has not been so talkative for a long time. Emperor Yongchang nodded. In that case, let's betroth the one from the Guan family to the third prince. Soon, it was spread that Guan Pan'er became the successor of the third prince's house. Concubine Yu pretended to shed tears of gratitude, and after kowtowing 3 times in front of the emperor, she asked Nanny Ying beside her to leave the palace that night to discuss the wedding with the Guan family. With concubine Yu's actions, the entire palace knew about it. In Fenji Palace, Queen Zhen 11 was really stunned when she heard Lily's report. Is the string really renewed? Lily nodded. It is said that the emperor personally selected the person. Concubine Yu has sent people out of the palace to go to the Guan family. I think there will be good news soon. The last one has just been laid to rest, and the next one can't wait to come. I didn't think that the third prince looked like the emperor before, but now I am blind. As for this sentimental and unrighteous spirit, it cannot be said that it has nothing to do with the emperor. It can only be said that it was carved from the same mold. When Bailey Fengming came in, he saw that the Queen Mother's face was not good, so she smiled and said, "Is the Queen Mother likely to have heard the news that brother 3 emperors is going to renew their marriage?" Empress Zhengzi waved to her son, "Have you heard about it too?" Bailey Fengming lifted her robe and sat next to her mother, and then she said, Bai Tu just sent a message to his son, saying that someone deliberately leaked in the palace that Miss Guan family went to the third prince's mansion today. Look at it, should be concubine Yu's intention to match her up. Queen Zhen 11 was stunned. So this is what you mean? Since concubine Panda was able to take Guan Pan'er to the third prince's residence for the funeral, she was pleased with the concubine. Queen Zhen 11 had heard about it early on, but she didn't take it to heart. But now, listening to Bailey Fengming's words, Queen Zhengzi had to take it seriously. After all, the palace only knew that Bai Tu was the chief steward around the emperor, but they had no idea that Bai Tu was now listening to Bailey Fengming's orders. Bailey Fengming didn't want to hide anything from his mother, so he just gave an overview of what happened in the third prince's house today. Although I was not present at the scene, I heard that it was Ayao's help that allowed concubine Panda to save her life. Grandma son, if this is the case, I thought that it would be in line with Ayao's wishes to allow Guan Pan'er to marry into the third emperor's brother's house. Empress Zhen 11 was stunned for a moment after hearing this. She really didn't expect that such a thing could happen during a funeral. Speaking of which, Aunt Fan in the third prince's residence is quite capable. No wonder she was able to deceive the emperor in the beginning, and even now she can still hide it without revealing anything. I am still wondering how you can care so much about such trivial things in the backyard. It turns out that you are just writing this to vent your anger on your wife, Empress Zhen 11 said with a smile. Regardless of whether Fan Swinning's plan today was achieved or not, Princess Pinglai and Fan Qingjao were involved in the plan. Even if Fan Qingjao did not suffer this time, Princess Pinglai almost lost 1 or 2 lives because of this. With Fan Qingjiao's clear-cut and protective temperament, how could he not be angry? So her son simply went along with the situation. On the surface, he was following concubine Yu's wishes, but in fact, he was helping his daughter-in-law to create trouble for Fan Swinning. Empress Zhen 11 looked at her son's increasingly mature features, feeling indescribably happy. Little Qingjao is a good girl, and my son knows that pampering her is a good thing. End of this chapter.